Mr. Bolton, how are you feeling?
Hey, Mr. Bolton, Mike Pence is being scared of the conspiracy to defraud the country. Where's Abby Lowe? What are you doing, sir? Feeling pretty good?
That was former National Security Advisor John Bolton leaving federal court this morning without answering questions from reporters, as you saw right there. He pleaded not guilty to 18 charges relating to unlawful mishandling of classified information. The Trump advisor turned adversary's arraignment lasted less than 20 minutes, and the judge told Bolton that he faces up to 10 years in prison if he's convicted. My panel is here in the arena. National political reporter from Axios, Alex Thompson, CNN political director and Washington bureau chief David Chalian, CNN global affairs commentator Sabrina Singh, and Republican strategist Shermichael Singleton. And we are also joined by CNN senior justice correspondent Evan Perez. All right, Evan, you were inside that courtroom today for the arraignment. Bring us inside.
Yeah, Pamela, John Bolton was very subdued. We used to seeing him here in the green room, and obviously he's always very friendly to reporters. I tried to talk to him when he got to the courthouse, and he was all business. And obviously these are very serious charges that he's facing, and you mentioned the amount of time that he could receive if he is convicted of all these 18 counts. And he was very respectful to the judge, obviously, in responding, yes, sir, yes, I do. But one of the interesting things about this case is the political aspect of this, obviously. And you've heard, obviously, from Bolton's attorneys and from him his own statement yesterday that he believes he's being targeted selectively by the Trump administration because of his criticism of the president. And there is something that I think a lot of us, really noticed in this indictment yesterday. There was a reference begins on page 19 of the 26-page indictment where prosecutors mentioned that Bolton himself in media interviews criticize Pete Hegseth and other national security officials in the Trump administration for their use of signal to discuss an ongoing military operation in Yemen. And they use that essentially to show that Bolton himself was aware of the implications of using an unsecure platform to discuss very sensitive information. But one of the things about that is interesting. It was almost like it was not a necessary thing for prosecutors to include in this indictment, Pamela. But it is not the last time we're likely to hear about this, because we know that the defense wants to make this issue, the issue of selective prosecution, part of their defense. And I suspect that this Signalgate controversy is going to become part of the talking points going forward. This is a case that's not going to trial for some time because of the national security information that is involved in the case. Pamela.
So you're saying that basically the defense would then argue, look at this, you're making your own case how this is selective prosecution because you're acknowledging that classified information was mishandled in this other way, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. And we know prosecutors at DOJ, we know FBI officials inside the FBI have been very concerned that they've not been asked or allowed to investigate the Signalgate issue, because they know that there were national security information that was being shared on an insecure manner. As a matter of fact, the reference in the indictment says, in an interview, Bolton discussed the damage to national security by using a non-governmental communication channel. That is the words of prosecutors from the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office in that indictment against Bolton.
We'll see how the defense uses that against their own case. Evan Perez, thank you so much. Sure. Let's bring in my panel now to discuss. Actually, I want to start with you, Sabrina, to get your thoughts on that tactic, the prosecutors including the Signalgate as a way to show, oh, John Bolton knew everything, about how to manage classified information. But also it kind of gives an opening to defense to say he's being selectively prosecuted.
I think it's interesting that they brought in Signalgate, and John Bolton, and is someone that worked in the national security space. We all know clearly, like when you put classified information, especially about a detailed operation that Pete Hegseth did in that Signalgate chat, John Bolton rightfully called it out, but now you're seeing it sort of backfire on him in this case because he knows how to handle classified information. And this is clearly a credible case. It was brought by a career prosecutor. So now it's in the hands of the justice system. But I think what's important here, too, is, the justice system or the DOJ has not been able to investigate Pete Hegseth. So there's a different sort of justice for friends of Donald Trump and his so-called enemies. And that's what I think John Bolton is trying to tease out here, is that I'm being unfairly, targeted, which I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, this was a case that started under the Biden administration, but Pete Hegseth has not faced any consequences either.
It started 2021. It's interesting, though, Sir Michael, because the Wall Street Journal's editorial board released this op-ed this morning saying, quote, there's little doubt that the underlying motivation for this prosecution is retribution. And you can't just look at this, in a vacuum. You have to look at the other indictments, too. You have James Comey, Letitia James. Those, of course, are different cases, and that distinction has been made by our legal analysts. But do you think that those other indictments essentially could weaken this case and the words that Donald Trump has used himself to target John Bolton?
No, I think those two cases are set aside. I see them as being disparate from this case. Again, as you noted, this began under the previous administration. Now, look, it's fair for Bolton to make the case that, hey, I'm not being protected like the Secretary of Defense because I'm not a friend or a supporter of the president. Okay, I'll entertain that. But that's an odious comparison, in my opinion. He broke the law. John Bolton has been in politics for, 40 years? I'm 35. That's longer than I've been alive. There isn't a person who should know better than most individuals how to handle classified information. I had a top secret clearance when I was briefly in the government. They are very precise and strict on what you can and cannot do. And if I, at 26, I believe, when I got my TS, John Bolton absolutely should have known better if I did at 26 years old. So there's no excuse for this.
All right, I want to listen to the sound from Congressman Jamie Raskin and then talk on the other side.
It seems like retention of classified documents is the go-to charge for people who had once worked for Donald Trump who've fallen out of favor with him. And, apparently there are sloppy practices generally in the government that might affect a lot of people, including Donald Trump himself. So, it's hard to know what to say about this other than there is no way that had Bolton not broken with Donald Trump, he would be facing these charges today.
What do you think, Alex? Do you think that he would be facing these charges if he was still friendly with Trump?
I mean, John Bolton's lawyers are clearly making the argument that Jamie Raskin is, and they're basically saying, that, and they are trying to use the chaos in the U.S. Attorney General's office, in the U.S. Attorney's office in Virginia with James Comey and Tish James. They're trying to leverage that in order to make a sympathetic case in this case, but there are bigger issues. Like, you had two judges in two different jurisdictions approve search warrants for this case. There are some issues, but I think there's also, if we zoom out a little bit, retaining classified documents has now been at the center of a lot of very politically fraught cases. Hillary Clinton, the email server.
Ask David about that. Yeah.
Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. Joe Biden in his garage. There is actually a larger debate of what is and is not classified.
Pence, yeah.
And Vice President Pence, too. I got my list right here. I mean, so many just in the last few years, and you have to wonder how that's going to factor in. And David, also, if you take a step back, I mean, I remember during the first term when John Bolton went into the White House for his first meeting to talk with Trump about becoming National Security Advisor. I remember when he then got the job, and it was a big deal. And now this term of events, it's really
It was a big deal. It was also a bit of a head scratcher because the two of them
remember that at the time.
They never really saw the world the same way. It was an odd pick for Donald Trump at the time. So I don't think there was ever a really warm, simpatico relationship between Donald Trump and John Bolton. But obviously, in the last 3 weeks, two of these three indictments are people that served in government that Donald Trump fired in his first term, right? And so I think we are wise to separate these cases out from a legal perspective, but two things can be true at the same time. This can be political retribution and appropriately sort of combined with those other cases, as well as it can and must be, from a legal perspective, separated out that this may be a more substantial case, and there may be, and again, everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty, but there may be a more successful road for a prosecution here.
Yeah, and he does. He has maintained his innocence. He pleaded not guilty today. All right, thank you, everyone.